Hi, and welcome back to the Turning 30 podcast, a place where we talk about what it's really like to turn 30. I'm your host, life coach Emma Wilson, and I'm here to help you feel better, get unstuck, and be more confident in your 30s. The new season of the podcast is well underway. This is the fourth official episode of the new season, and we're getting deeper into the 90s and almost at episode 100 for all episodes. And it's really exciting because the podcast has been getting record amount of downloads, record amount of listens, and loads of new people here in my community. So welcome and thank you so much. I have loved this first month of the podcast, and I'm really looking forward to sharing even more episodes. I wanted to say that as I'm recording this, I released the episode with Jigna Patel around getting divorced young, and I have been inundated with so many amazing messages of support, women sharing their own divorce stories, breakup stories, and just saying how it makes them feel not alone to know that other people are going through this at this time. So it just makes me realize how important it is to bring these topics to the podcast. And I wanted to do a shout out for suggestions that if there is this topic that is burning for you and you want me to talk about a specific guest that you want me to invite on, a specific subject that you feel like you need more guidance on, please let me know. I am always happy to hear. You can let me know by contacting me on my Instagram account. That's where I usually am hanging out with my community. And that's at Turning 30 Coach. The 30 are the numbers 30. And I'm also inviting all of you, if you haven't already, to subscribe to my brand new Turning 30 YouTube channel. This YouTube channel is going to have even more content than the podcast. So the podcast will have the weekly podcast episodes, and I'm also releasing monthly Q&As and personal life updates there, where I'm going to be sharing even more than I usually do on the podcast. So you can go to the link in the show notes and already sign up to the YouTube channel to make sure that you'll be the first to know when one of those videos is released. And if you've not already, I would really appreciate if you could give the podcast a review. You can subscribe, whatever channel you're listening to. And yeah, let's try and get the podcast into as many ears as possible. Now, the episode today is a solo episode, so you just get me. And it's a topic that comes up time and time again. It's actually a huge topic. I'm going to try not to talk for too long. It's something that I could run a 3-hour workshop on. Maybe one day I will. But for now, we're going to keep this to a short-ish podcast episode. And it's a topic that has also been requested by a few of my community. And it's all about turning 30 or being in your 30s and experiencing age anxiety. So what I mean by that is experiencing feelings of anxiety connected to growing older, connected to being in your 30s, and it's probably connected to a birthday. Now, I wanted to read to you some words that a client of mine wrote. She actually published this in the Next Chapter community group. For all of those of you who don't know, the Next Chapter is my coaching foundations course and my community where you can sign up and basically learn all of the basics if you're interested in coaching and you want to build your next chapter, create a fresh start, and really learn how you can use coaching tools to make your life better, to move into that next version of yourself. That's what the Next Chapter is. So just a reminder for those of you who don't know or haven't seen on my Instagram, that's currently for the rest of November on sale for $99, and you get access to my amazing friendship mini course if you sign up for free. So go check that out before it runs out. I think this episode will be released just at the end of November, so you probably have around a week left to go and catch that deal. But we have a Facebook community, and in that community I invite the members, there's almost over 80 women in there now, to share what they are currently working on, what they're going through. And a client of mine wrote, I'm just going to read it off here. I'm turning 30 in just over 2 months, and today it hit me hard. I feel like I'm doing all of the work journaling, therapy, other personal development stuff, as well as working towards my next chapter goals. But I just feel super wobbly and weird about my life direction, choices, my relationship, and the rest. Any advice is welcome to try and not get into anxious spirals during this time. And her voice echoes so many of my community that I speak to, my clients that really think about being in their 30s, and it brings up this really intense emotion and anxiety of thinking not even just where you're going in your life path, but also anxiety about growing older, anxiety about life in general, about entering a new phase of life, about being an adult when maybe up until then you haven't really thought about those kinds of things. And, it can be very, very strong. So in this episode, I'm going to share some personal stories and some kind of experiences that I've had about age anxiety and my personal views as to why age anxiety happens at this age, and also what we can do about it. So to know that you don't have to be trapped or in fear of an anxious spiral, that you can actually make some changes to help yourself. So, I just, before we even get started, want to do something that I try to do a lot when somebody comes to me with a specific problem or issue, is to validate that issue. And for anybody listening who resonates with anxiety, with birthday anxiety, age anxiety, it's really normal. It's not something pleasant. I know that for sure. It's not something pleasant, but it's something that many of us go through. I mean, I go through it and went through it to the point where I created a business around it. For me, I have this thing, I call it the birthday hole, right? That birthday dread usually happens 3 months before my birthday. I'm a end of June baby, and it usually starts around April time when I know my birthday is coming up, and I feel this sense of panic and dread and fear that things aren't going the way that they should. And then this almost like awareness of growing older. And, big birthdays are a lot, especially the round numbers. For me, 29 and 30 specifically were really hard birthdays. And 35 was a specifically difficult one, which I think is for, the biological clock reasons. And I was researching for this episode. I was trying to find some sort of psychology evidence or study. And I did actually find that there has been studies done, scientific research that shows that milestone birthdays do create a heightened sense of introspection. And another study, like one was studying milestone birthdays in general. So that can be, 30, 40, 50, any round number birthday. And another relevant study that I found showed that this was particularly heightened in your 30s. And, it's a time in your 30s where you really self-evaluate. And because of that, because you go into hyper awareness and you really starting to think about your life in that way, it can create this sense of panic and anxiety and what I think is existential questioning. And, the question is why? Like, why 30? And I think for many of you who know my content, you will have heard me speaking about this a lot, but I do want to repeat it because I think it's really important. It's the social pressures to have done certain things by a certain time. So what I call in my coaching the turning 30 manuals, right? The word manual is the instruction manual that we follow when we think about turning 30. And we create that instruction manual when we're probably much, much, much younger, in our late teens, our early 20s, where we have this perception of what our life will look like and be like as we're turning 30, or when we're already in our 30s. And I think for most of us millennials, most of us who are in our late 20s and 30s and maybe even 40s listening to this, it will be those really like milestone things, the having a good job, a secure job, having and financial security that comes with that, being in a relationship, being married. For some people that also includes babies, and being on the path to build a family, and also buying property, having a mortgage, being on the property ladder is another really, really big one. And we have all these expectations that will have happened by a certain date. And when it doesn't happen, we feel like we failed. We feel like we had an instruction manual for our life, but the instruction manual, we don't think the manual was wrong. We think that we're wrong, that we've not been able to follow the instructions accordingly, which obviously is not true, but that's really what we feel. And I want to really validate the manuals by saying it makes sense when you think about who our parents are and how we were treated growing up, what they did. I can look at my family, my mum, who did marry young, but it wasn't really young for the time, it was normal. In the 80s, she was pregnant with me when she was 22. And she had 3 kids by the time she was 28, so 27. And that was just normal then. And therefore, we think, even if we know, and we do know that statistics are changing, we do understand that the age of marriage is getting higher. And we understand that many people, the divorce statistics have changed, which also affects people's want to get married. And we know that the average age of giving birth for the first time is vastly different from what it was in the 70s and the 80s when a lot of our parents were giving birth. But it doesn't matter. These are the people who educated us. This is all we knew when we were growing up. Also our teachers, also in popular culture. And because of that, we've formed these really, really strong beliefs based on societal expectations, which basically means that we feel this extreme pressure to reach the milestones. And we cannot ignore these pressures in terms of how they will affect our anxiety, because that anxiety comes from somewhere, and that anxiety comes from failed expectations, or it comes from that feeling that we're doing something not right, and then we panic because we think, okay, we only have a certain time to do all of these things, now we've got to really, really quickly do them. And also, let's not even mention popular culture, so the TV shows that we watched. Friends, huge Friends fan, love it. But Friends started at 25 when they were 25, and it finished when they were 35. And when they were turning 30, there was like this huge episode all about turning 30, one of my favorite episodes, obviously. But even that really addressed that feeling of like having to, panic and get married and rush and all of those things. And apart from Joey, by the time that they were 35, they had all found partnership. And well, actually, obviously, Rachel and Ross is only in the last episode, but it was very like emphasized that that's what you would do. And you would like, almost like they were validating that age old story that your 20s, you can kind of fuck up and have career changes and do all the things. But then by your 30s, you should get it all together. And I think also the movie 13 Going on 30, great movie. Love it. She wakes up from being 13 years old to being 30 years old in this like stunning walk-in wardrobe with like designer everything, and lives in this gorgeous apartment. And you like kind of see that and you're like, oh, so by the time I'm 30, I should have all those things, when really most of us, when we're turning 30, we're living in flat shares and don't own properties, and we don't have our own gorgeous walk-in wardrobes full of designer clothes. And lastly, when I was thinking of this episode of what creates more anxiety, I was thinking of Bridget Jones, how she's labelled a spinster at 32. And let's not even go into the fact that they labelled her as overweight when she clearly wasn't overweight. And yeah, like that pressures that we put on us. These are the movies and the TV shows that we grew up with. And it makes sense completely that with viewing these over the years, that when we then are therefore coming up to our birthday and we don't have those things, that we do think that we've done something wrong. And I went through this myself. I loved my 20s. I was a bit of a free spirit. After deciding to quit law, I went off, did my own thing, moved country. I traveled a lot. I didn't really adhere to these turning 30 manuals. But then after having this kind of like footloose and fancy free mindset in my 20s, the 30s loomed on my 29th birthday, and I still felt the panic. I was not immune to it, just because I'd chosen a different path to many of my friends who had kind of done the things in the order that they were told to do. And, it really came up for me, why is my life like this? And I think it's a message that many of us struggle with, is that your 20s are the time to do what the hell you want, go and live, go and have fun, go and enjoy. But then all of a sudden at 30, we're expected to have our shit together. But the truth is, at what point during our late 20s and our early 30s are we supposed to all of a sudden have enough money for a property if we've gone traveling and changed jobs and done all these things? So it's very, very, very mixed messaging, because on one hand, we're being really signaled to be settled down at 30, but on the other hand, we're being told to go and enjoy your 20s. So you can imagine it's mind-blowing why anybody wouldn't feel confused at this age. And it just, I know I'm still talking about this validation, but I think it really makes sense why anxiety occurs, because we're confused and we don't understand. And like my client who had written in the first place that message to me saying, I'm really questioning my career, my relationship, all of the things. And that's why. It's because we think on some level that we should have all of those things calm, settled, under control, and know what we're doing. And I hate to break it to you, but I actually think at any age we don't have that. And we're just living in very different times to our parents and very, very different times to all the generations above us. Now, I also want to talk about the more existential side to it, because I think something that I've heard a lot, and I speak a lot about what I've just been speaking about, timelines, milestones, expectations, things that come up at this age. But what I've never really spoken about before is age anxiety and the feeling of fear of being older. And I think it's something that we don't really address that much, because most people think that it's too young to think about it or too young to talk about it. But I personally believe that in our teens, when we're children, teens, 20s, we almost like live a bit of an oblivious life. Like we're quite naive to the bigger things in the world. Not all of us, some of us have very different paths, but many of us don't actually really grasp the fact that we're getting older. We're just living. It's this existential feeling of getting older and consideration of becoming an adult. Now, I personally think that in our 20s, we're a little bit shielded from this. Not for all of us. Some of us really go on our own path, and, things happen to us younger than others. And I don't want to jump over that. But I do think from my experience, a lot of us are a little bit naive and oblivious in our 20s and our teens to the kind of growing up. We just don't think of life as something finite. And then we are turning 30 and we all of a sudden it hits us. Oh my gosh, we are growing up. Our lives aren't going to go on forever. We do, change. Our physical body change, our mentality changes. Life isn't going to just be infinite. And for me, it's the first time that I realized this. And I think it can come in the form of also seeing our parents aging for the first time. And for some people, unfortunately, who experience the death of a parent quite young, and they see, maybe not even a parent, maybe, it could be somebody else around them, but it can also be illness. And I think that it's something that becomes more apparent. Obviously, the older that we get, the more frequently we're reminded of these things. And I was discussing it with a client of mine in one of our one-on-one coaching sessions, and she was explaining to me that something really happened to her on her 35th birthday, where she started to become a lot more aware of that. And it made her feel really anxious about aging, anxious about her own physical health. She started to really experience anxiety symptoms, thinking that she was not well and questioning if there was something wrong with her. And also something that I was discussing with some friends, that is like almost like a kind of addiction, like looking at other people on Instagram who are sharing about their illnesses. This is something that we see a lot, people who are diagnosed with cancer and they sharing their journey. And it had happened to her that an old friend of hers had shared that she was experiencing, sadly, terminal cancer. And she said it just put life in this whole new perspective that she had never thought of before. And I was really thinking about it, and I was thinking how sometimes in our 30s, it is the first exposure that we get to these big life things, and it's really hard. And I also think that's a big part of what makes us anxious about growing up. And I want to even diverge from that and say that as women, we have been taught and signaled from a really young age all the time to be afraid of getting older. Okay, we're talking about having to cover grey hair, anti-wrinkle cream, the fact that most models are in their teens, in their early 20s, the fact that we are kind of signaled that the older you get as a woman, the less valuable that you are. It can also link to career. It can link to the fact that many women, and this is a whole different topic, but having children can really affect your career and make you fall behind in the workplace. And that's kind of tangled up in this narrative of, if you are a woman, you are in your prime, in your early 20s, maybe late 20s. And then after your 30s, kind of your 30s, you're still in your prime. But then after that, like 40 and beyond is like, we just see that narrative all the time that women are fading away. I'm not saying I believe this narrative at all. Of course I don't. But this is what we're signaled in society. And I think that, it creates even more fear. It creates more anxiety. It's inevitable that we feel afraid to grow up when we are constantly told that our value in life is going down the older that we get. And again, a whole other episode linked to fertility is that as women, we are predisposed to feeling anxious because of our biological clocks. So overall, when you think about everything I'm talking about, the milestones and those expectations that we have that often aren't met, plus this first exposure to aging and the understanding that we as women, as human beings, aren't, infinite, and we will at some point die and our lives will end. And add to that this narrative about the fear of growing older as women and being less valuable and being less fertile and less relevant in society, doesn't it just make sense that we would feel anxious? Doesn't it just make sense that we would panic and try and reverse aging? But alas, we aren't Peter Pan. And I don't want this episode to be coming in hot with lots of reasons to make you anxious. I was saying all those things to really validate and make you aware that it is normal to feel anxious. But I now want to go to the second part of the episode to talk about how can we deal with these anxieties? Like, how can we really deal with it? How can we confront the age anxiety that so often crops up in our 30s and address it, but not make it affect our lives? And I think that the biggest thing here for me is acceptance. Acceptance is huge. Acceptance that there's only one certain thing in life, and that is that life at some point will end. Time is passing, and we must accept that. And it's really hard to do it when you've never really thought about it before. And I think a lot of people don't want to address it. It's too scary. Maybe even listening to this, you're feeling confronted, maybe feeling a bit afraid. Maybe what I'm saying is a bit like making you feel panicky, but it's something we can't run away from. We can't shy away from it. And I think it's really, really important not to pretend that life is something else. And in order to accept, I think each person has an individual process of what it means to accept. And for some people, it can come from reading a specific book, or even maybe listening to a specific podcast episode, or going on your own journey of acceptance. For one, when I've experienced this before, I've really tapped into my spiritual self. So I've really read a lot around life and really got interested in the deeper things that I had never, really been interested in before. The past few years, I've done a lot of deep diving into what it means for me to accept and embrace the finality of life, and to connect with that part of myself that often once suppressed it because I didn't want to really confront it or accept it. In my Next Chapter program, I have a whole module with a few different recordings on acceptance. So for any of you who are already in that program, you can go and read those and listen to those self-study modules and really have a reflection on it. But I think that it's really important to understand that, and it's just like my client said in the message that I read out before, is that sometimes doing all of the things doesn't really help, because what we're trying to do is run away from the anxiety. But what we actually need to do is befriend the anxiety. We need to accept that anxiety isn't actually going anywhere. The anxiety is with us. We can lessen it, and I'll talk about how in a moment. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that growing older can feel anxious, and it's okay. And someone said this to me once, and it's always really stuck with me when I was really anxious about something, is that ask your anxiety what it wants. Befriend your anxiety and ask your anxiety what it's trying to tell you, what it's trying to teach you. And that really made me feel calm, because it made me realize that it's okay to feel the anxiety, and I just need to tap into it and ask those questions. So the biggest thing I hope you take away from this episode is that you can go on a journey with your acceptance of these things, with that, especially the existential things that I've been talking about, and really understand how that, what it means to you and what you can do with that. And it isn't something that is going to be resolved in one podcast episode, but it's definitely an opportunity. This anxiety that you might be experiencing is a chance and an opportunity to go and explore more what's going on. And I would say an opportunity for you to access your tools to control your mind, to learn how to really deal with those anxious thoughts. So many of you will have heard of mindfulness, but for me, that is a lot to do with really understanding what my beliefs are, really understanding how my mind is working and my emotions together. So I do this with my one-on-one clients, and it's really, understanding, what do I believe, getting out that piece of paper in your journal and writing at the top, being in my 30s, growing older, aging, and then writing down all of the thoughts that come up. Do you have a really strong belief that growing old is negative? Write it down. Do you have a strong belief that in 10 years' time you won't be relevant in your workplace anymore? Write it down and really get clear on what these beliefs are, and then question them, because many of them might not be true, or many of them we can choose not to believe. Our minds are like toddlers running around in a supermarket, very, very hungry, and they're just like grabbing things off the shelf. But what we can learn to do, and this is really what I've learned to do over the years with my anxiety, is to calm it, to calm my nervous system. And everyone has different methods for that. Breathing is a really good one. So doing some breath work, doing some meditation and yoga. Journaling is a great one. For me, I'm very somebody who likes to get all the worries and thoughts out on the page and then sift through them. And I truly believe that this anxiety can be tackled head on. Now, I also want to talk about this narrative, the women growing less valuable over time, because I think that it's something that we can feed into if we choose to. And it's something that I want to call all of you to do, is to not be a victim of this narrative. Because often when we play up to these stories, we then might start being more quiet, being more introverted, not going for that promotion at work, wearing clothes that aren't really an expression of our personality. We might start to hide parts of ourselves away. We might get really slaved into this whole capitalist, anti-wrinkle, dyeing your hair. And don't get me wrong, I dye my hair. I'm not saying that we all have to, do all of these things completely perfectly, but there's something about showing up in a different way to actually flip the narrative and reverse it. And just because society expects us as women to grow older and to not be front and center as we go into our 40s, we don't have to be that way. We can just be proud and bold and all of the things that we want to be. So I'm just calling out to all of you that, aging doesn't have to be something scary. It can actually be something so amazing. And for me, something that over the years has really helped me is to connect with older women, connect with role models, older women who have really paved the way and shown how growing older can be something really inspiring and something really exciting. And I've Googled many times before, and I've also shared it on my Instagram, women who really successful in their 40s and 50s, and just knowing that we're just getting started. Our 30s are so young still. The average age expectancy for women I think is like 83 or maybe even higher. And we're in our 30s. We've got time. And I just urge all of you to really take that time, almost like take this narrative of time running out, take this time of, oh my God, I'm growing up and growing older and life is passing me by, and then deciding what to do with it. Deciding, so does that mean I'm going to go into myself, or am I going to go out and see it as an opportunity to live, see it as an opportunity to grab life by the horns and just go and do all of the things. And for me, that's what my 30s have really been. It's been, okay, I can see that I'm growing up. I can see that life isn't always happy and bad things happen in the world, and people are getting older, and people I love and care about are, getting sick and all of the negative things, and saying, what am I going to do with that information? Am I going to let it just wash over me and then stay here? Or am I actually going to make it, mean that I'm going to live my life in the best way possible, get out my comfort zone? Am I going to just really live? And I love that one life mentality. And I wish and I hope that all of you, when you're listening to this episode, can feel that inspiration of, yes, I can do that too. I can really feel that one life mentality and go and live the life and live my path, an aligned path, as I love to say, and just enjoy our short time here on this planet in these bodies. I think that it's so important to do that and to not just let this anxiety sweep over us and stop us from living the lives that we really want. And the last thing that I will say, and this is like another piece of advice for all of you, and it's really in relation to birthdays, because as I mentioned before, whenever I have birthdays coming up, I feel terrified. I feel all of the things that I'm sure many of you feel. And I often use it as a chance to evaluate and have some introspection. But when I do that, quite often I ask myself toxic questions. And some toxic questions that you might ask are, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? Why haven't I achieved more by now? Why am I still single? Why am I not married? Why don't I have children? Why don't I have money in the bank? Why don't I have a mortgage? Why am I supposed to, is this where I'm supposed to be by this age? Why does it feel like everyone else has got their life sorted out? And when we ask toxic questions, we get toxic answers, and those toxic answers will drag us down. And what I want you to get used to doing is asking healthy questions. Asking healthy questions that can help you reflect, but in a way that's going to give you productive answers. So, for example, taking all those questions I just said and asking things like, what have I learned about myself in the past year? What have I learned about myself in the past years? What are my current focuses? What do I want to change? What do I want to achieve before my next birthday? What do I want to achieve by the time I'm 40 years old? What small changes can I already start to make that is going to make my life even better? What makes me feel inspired? So these are all questions. You can jot some of them down that will make you feel better, will hopefully be able to lessen that anxiety and open up the options for different ways that you can live your life. Now I want to finish on a quote. It's actually a quote that I wrote. I don't know, I think I was having a conversation with a client of mine. She was actually one of my first coaching clients, and she was 50 at the time, and that was about 6 years ago. And she's become somebody, we're friends and we always keep in contact. And she said to me once, and I think this is really true for many people who have lost a loved one at a young age, that when you lose somebody in your life, it makes you appreciate being alive a lot more. And it's really sad that it takes that for us to do it, but often it does. When we experience grief and loss of somebody close to us, it makes us want to live our lives even more vibrantly. And she always said to me, because she had lost her sister very young, I think in her 30s or her 40s, and she said that loss created for her this insatiable appetite for life. And I wanted to finish with a quote that I often repeat to people, and then it's that the reason why getting older is so beautiful is because we get to evolve into the humans that we want to be and learn about ourselves year on year. And that is why aging is a privilege. So I'll just leave you on that note that aging, growing up, being in our 30s and beyond is a huge privilege. We should all remind ourselves and just be grateful that we get to experience life. And as we work on ourselves and as we do this self-development work that I know many of you listen to this podcast because I speak about this topic, our minds become more intricate and more developed. We evolve and we become more conscious. And it's the beauty of that that makes our 30s the best decade. And I will see you all on the podcast next week.